Welcome to the Carl Vibe Show. You are live here tonight with us on the YouTube channel, on Twitter, and also on Facebook. We have a really special guest tonight who has all kinds of experience into the physics research and scientific research revolving around the Uintah Basin, with active research ongoing right now with credible scientific devices that they have constructed and built to place in the community and around the entire region, with the legends of the Skinwalkers and sightings of UFOs and all sorts of paranormal activity up in northern Utah in the Uintah Basin. We're joined tonight with Jim Segala. Let's go ahead and bring him on board. He's got over, degrees in physics and advanced degrees in engineering and everything. Jim, how are you doing tonight, my
Very
friend?
good. Very good.
I'm so glad to have you tonight. I talk to a lot of people who have a tremendous amount of experience with the phenomenon itself, with interesting uh, paranormal or energetic activity that live up in the Uintah Basin. I have family members that live up there.
Sure.
But it's really interesting to actually get the opportunity today to talk with you and kind of pick your brain a little bit, because you've actually got the credentials and the background, and you've been involved in the research ongoing in that area for quite some time. So maybe let's start there, Jim. If you want to give everybody a bit of a background about kind of your scientific background, your education,
Sure.
and how you got into this whole field of research, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I started out as an engineer back, when I was younger. You had some advanced degrees in engineering, worked in engineering all my life. Decided to go back to school at some point to get a PhD in physics and specialize in advanced physics topics, and then also biological physics and things like that. I taught colleges. I taught at Ivy League colleges, and so then once I got out of that whole education realm, I actually landed a really good position at a think tank in Austin, Texas, that was run by a very well-known scientist who has done a lot of things with the government and also in the private sector. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with him. And of course, this particular agency or this particular institution that I worked with was they were the chief scientists for people like Bob Bigelow when he had his stint with the Uintah Basin and Skinwalker and things like that. And of course, so I got into the mix with all these people, and now it's like, I see what's going on in different parts of the country, especially in the basin. And it leads me to the fact that, there are a lot of good scientific things to be learned in that area. And I'm just pursuing to put devices and build experience and get some scientific data so I can answer some of the very crazy questions that are coming out of there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the misconceptions, is there's a lot of this idea that the research that's going on around the Uintah Basin, that there's going to be some kind of big forensic lab that moves in, or like the men in black are going to come in and show up with these Escalades and all this scientific gear and everything. But really, ultimately, when people want to get research done, they actually want to try and detect anomalies or different things. They have to reach out to people like you that actually are scientists or have
Yeah.
the background or the experience and education in the physics or whatever, and bring you into those projects to help design maybe even devices that don't exist in order to try and measure these anomalies and things. So how long ago would you say your initial involvement in these kinds of projects started? When did that all begin?
So probably back in maybe 2008, 2009 area when I started to work with the people that were involved with the ranch and this strange phenomena. Working for a gentleman by the name of Dr. Hal Putoff, who has a really well-known institution in Austin. And with his context, because he was, like I said, he was the chief advisor or the science advisor for Bigelow. He was on the boards of all sorts of things. So it's amazing the kind of exposure that you get when you work with people like that. You have so many experiences, and then you get to see all the data. A lot of people say, well, Bob Bigelow didn't have any data. He didn't share it. Well, he shared it with some people, and I was fortunate enough to be involved with those kind of people. And
Mhm.
I saw some of the things that happened and worked with the data. So very fortunate.
So Jim, are you under certain contracts or NDAs where you're not allowed to talk about certain projects that you work on or that you're actively working on?
So there's some projects that I work on now so I'm working a lot with the people that are out in the basin and around the country that I have associations with. Of course, I can't reveal anything about their personal. There's HIPAA and there's all
Right.
sorts of rules about that, but nothing that I have any contractual obligations with anybody. I'm free
Mm.
to discuss. There's certain things that I do. I do go to Washington and brief certain members of the government, so I can't reveal any of that information. But besides that, I'm free to discuss whatever I want. In fact, I want to discuss a lot of this stuff because it's fascinating what we're finding out in the basin and around the country, and people should know.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something kind of where you're positioned right now, where you feel like you know a lot of the answers, or you feel like you've got solutions to some of the problems people are encountering, but you just aren't allowed to talk about it right now? Is that a frustration for you?
No, I think we're free to talk about it. And actually, what I tell everybody, and I make sure everybody understands, is that the reason that we're collecting the data is only to bring it out to the public in the form of either a scientific paper or maybe a book or a monogram or something like that.
Right.
And this is for, of course, selfish for me to say, well, it'd be really cool to figure this stuff out. But really, I think it's wise to bring it out to the people so they understand what's going on. And there's a lot of people that are in the basin specifically that have fears of what happens. They dread going out, and they have these experiences. And
Mm.
if I can give them some peace of mind to show them that there's, this is really just a physical phenomena, or this is something that is explainable, I mean, that would help them out a lot.
Right. So that begs the question is how do you approach that, you know? And I do want to circle back to, I mean, it's so fascinating that you mentioned Hal Puthoff and Bigelow. You have certain names that revolve around this topic that seem to go clear back into these interesting programs. Because like Hal
Sure.
Puthoff, he was involved in the Stanford Research Institute projects with remote viewing, and that
Yes.
bleeds over into the Gateway Institute research over at the Monroe Institute, where they were studying the gateway method for out of body travel. So there's all this consciousness studies and things like that that revolve around this in the background. But then at some point, the rubber meets the road, and you have this psychic phenomenon or subconscious phenomenon in these research studies going on. But then there's the actual reality of the research that has to occur as well. How do you study the paranormal? How do you study these upticks in energetic phenomenon in the community? And that's where someone like you comes in
Mhm.
to try and build devices or to create a way in order to capture or measure this stuff. Like, I hate to say it, but like real Ghostbusters, what's the actual practical reality of measuring what's going on with
Right.
this strange anomalies in the area? So, this goes clear back research a long time. You got started in the like 2008, 2009 era around then. And I mean, back then, a lot of it was pretty secret and not many, it wasn't as public like with the TV show and everything back at that time, right? So,
Well, yeah, that was when Bigelow was doing ATIP. So all that stuff was very secret. I mean, nobody really advertised or broadcast that. I mean, there was some summaries printed, but a lot of the ATIP stuff. And then when he had Skinwalker Ranch, he never really published anything. So it was, for him, it was very secretive. And
mm,
then, of course, when I worked for the Institute, they didn't really talk about it with anybody else. They had a lot of private research. But now it's kind of like it's out there. I don't think there's anybody. I think the people in the Skinwalker Ranch kind of keep everything kind of buried, but like the Black Frog people, they just love telling people stuff, and I think that's the way to go. I mean, why should people be
mm.
kept in the dark? It's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like there's a whole era of research and stuff that was going on, and it makes you wonder why so much of that has just been under wraps, especially with Mr. Bigelow and why he doesn't reveal so much of it. But how does that your involvement in that work come up? Like how does somebody like you working at your regular field of work and teaching at universities and things to get scooped up for these side projects? Does somebody approach you and offer you a job, or how does that happen?
Well, that's a really good question because everything happens as a happenstance, right? You just happen to be in the right spot at the right time, or actually the wrong spot at the right time. And I had a certain set of skills. I was teaching a lot of biophysics. I understood a lot about how the body reacts to certain energies that are out there, whether it's radiation or heat or anything like that. So there was a lot of cases that were in the area of when people would go to the hospital with these incredibly horrible ailments and diseases, and the attending physicians would just have no idea what's going on. I was fortunate enough to be at a position with the institute where they were called up by the owner of one of the places where a pretty significant injury occurred, and they asked for a group of scientists to come in and kind of take it from where the attending physicians at the emergency room left off, to kind of give an explanation of why exactly did this person get sick. And I think a lot of people don't know about this case, but it was a case where somebody had been in the Uintah Basin and they were hit by something and changed their personality, went through a horrible week where, I mean, the whole personality changed, incredibly bad headaches. He had big swelling in the back of his head, ended up in the hospital. They almost pronounced him, like, go get your family, because it's not going to be very good. He did recover, but this scared everybody there, and a lot of the people that were around him. And they called us in and said, they they wanted a group of people to come in and say, okay, what really happened to this guy? And what was great was that it was all very new. I mean, it was just like weeks ago, so we had a lot of the information. The patient was still in that area where a lot of the things that were in his blood were still in his blood, so we could do all sorts of tests on him. And we discovered some very interesting things that from that. And that was, one of the things that really turned me on to, there is something going on here. And it's not something that people say, oh, that's just in your head, or you're making that up, or, you're just hallucinating. I mean, if you have a physical phenomenon that happens while you have these experiences, you can't discount it. This person had obvious radiation damage to his brain. He had skin lesions that showed that there was something that happened. And when it comes down to it, you say, well, there's a physical thing. Your body really can't do that by itself. It needs some external sources to do that. So
Right.
that's
Now,
how I got involved.
did he have that initial case? Did he have like any kind of a witness experience, or was he just like suddenly feeling ill and then came down with these symptoms just randomly, or was there a UFO encounter? Or
Well, there was, not a per se a UFO encounter. You have to realize that, when you say what he did have an experience when he was given direction, he felt that he was getting very, very strong direction from some outside voice prior to that, for the week prior to that. And, he had, when we did the histology and we actually interviewed him and wrote everything down, it was like very interesting. Like the week before, he would have these incredible headaches and he would be told what to do. He was like instructed what to do. And then, of course, he got into the point where his personality just changed, and his family members were asking him, what's going on? What's wrong? And for a whole week, he was just, serious headaches. He checked into the hospital, said, I have an incredible migraine or whatever it was. They didn't know what it was. They sent him home, and he went back the next day and says, look, I'm really, really sick. I've got this big bump on the back of my head. I can't, my vision is blurred. I'm getting terrible earaches. So at that point, I think it was like the attending says, yeah, there's something wrong with this guy. And of course, he had this major lesion on the back of his head. Is like, that just doesn't happen. And you say, well, did you hit your head? Did you do, somebody hit you or something? And there was no evidence of any trauma, nothing like that. So it was obvious something was going on.
That's fascinating. So when you were brought in on this initial project, were you kind of debriefed on anything like about the anomalies going on within the basin, or was it something where you were just brought in case by case to try and get an objective opinion as you saw the evidence without all that
Yeah,
mythology and the folklore added into it?
at that point, I really didn't know much about the basin. I knew a lot about what Bigelow, the data Bigelow had, because I had been working on some of that stuff, but it was more isolated, compartmentalized. But when I was actually involved in this particular case is when I started to get exposed to the possibility that there is some strange phenomena that seems to perpetuate all over the basin.
Hmm.
And that piqued my interest. He says, what is this? Is it possible that this guy got hurt in the basin and there's other people that are going to get hurt? Is that something that, I could help with? So,
So then you got hooked from there. You got involved in that initial project, trying to help this initial individual, and then
right.
there was you. Did you discover there was more cases, and that this actually goes back quite some time in the area, or?
Well, I was fortunate enough to work with an amazing, he's a neurologist, a forensic neurologist. So the kind of guy that goes back and looks at histologies and looks back at all the interesting things that happen to a lot of patients. And he had a stack of many, many patients, a lot of them that were boots on the ground with Bigelow, some just spent a lot of time. So there was, it turns out there's like a lot of cases that were piled up that were not too dissimilar from this. I mean, people going,
Hmm.
believe it or not, catatonic. I mean, there was evidence where there was one individual, and this is well before the current owner was. This is back in the Bigelow day, where one of the people, became catatonic, ended up in the hospital for weeks and weeks with pretty, very serious injuries.
It's fascinating. So, in that initial research, you're brought in with like a team of other people that have a different emphasis in their field of research and what they do. So you're kind of like one
Yeah, I
aspect of a
was.
whole group of individuals coming in to try and figure it out. And was there a sense that the government had a keen interest in what you were doing, or was what you were doing kind of a compartmentalized faction of government research as well?
Well, just to be honest with you, there was a after we did the analysis and we came up with our conclusion, created a report. We were actually contacted by the government agency to come and brief them. So that's when that was my first trip into Washington to brief them. So they were extremely interested.
Hmm.
They asked so many great questions. They wanted to know, first of all, they don't tell you anything. They're not going to tell you anything,
Right.
but they want to know. So we shared it with them. We didn't want to keep anything secret. So and a lot of the people that I worked with, the forensic neurologists, they were all ex-government employees with, lots of years of experience doing this kind of thing.
Right, that's so interesting. So you got involved with all of that, started researching it. How did you and your team begin to approach even studying it? Because did you look at it from a, like, this could be a geological phenomenon, or this is a paranormal phenomenon, something to do with consciousness, or this idea of extraterrestrials, other dimensional beings? Everything seems out on the table like a big
Yeah.
buffet right now, where everybody has so many different angles. But back then, in the beginning, how did you guys approach it objectively to begin the research and to try and study it? Because it seems like it's so heavily to do with some sort of radiation signal or electromagnetic, I don't know, some microwaves or something
Yep.
cooking people and affecting people. How did you guys approach it from there?
So on the team was myself as a biological physicist. We had other physicists. We had another physicist on the team, but we had our medical doctor on the team. So what we did is approach it in a evidence-based analysis. So you always just go from what do you know and what can you build from there. So we looked at all the CT scans, MRIs. They did every day that they were in the hospital, they would do blood draws and they would do pathologies and stuff like that on, any fluids that they bring out. So that is all the medical data that you have, and then you lay all that. And once and then of course that's just part of it. And then you have to go interview the person. You have to interview the person, interview the family members, and you try to weed out. And you ask the same questions over and over again in a different way, and you try to because we're human beings are great scientific instruments, but we're the worst scientific reporters because our brains get in the way. And then we say, wow, that's a phenomena that we see. But when we try to explain it to somebody, of course, we just spit in all our other junk that we got in our head. So you have to be very worried when you get stuff like that. But actually, it's so what we did is we gathered all the medical, verifiable medical data that we could possibly get. And then we go and we had all the human interaction, interpretations that we can get. And then you lay all that out in front of you and you look at all the possible vectors that can happen or that can go into doing something like this. You got viral, bacterial, autoimmune. There's all these different vehicles that can create these kind of symptoms and the result of this, inevitable result of this disease. And you lay them all out, and some don't fit. Some you just have to just completely throw away, or I shouldn't say throw away. You never throw away anything in science. You always give it a probability. See, the probability that it was autoimmune is lower because of these 5 things. And so you kind of weed through all the things, and what's left after the end is like the most probable vector that you can figure out. And what we came up with is that, look, it was almost identical. Exactly what happened to this guy was almost identical to radiation exposure, but very, very precise, very high speed radiation exposure. Like he got hit with a pulse or something like that. And then we went ahead and we did a complete mathematical analysis of this, where we took the actual data that we got from all the imaging and everything like that, and we ran scenarios that we thought, and we kind of simulated all different radiation type of sources and these kind of things and compared them. And we finally came up with one that where we have a certain type of radiation that we expose to a mannequin type of thing, and it matched what this person had. So we kind of figured out it was what kind of radiation, how fast it was going, and things like that. So it was pretty clear that it was something in that area.
So what did you discover? What kind of radiation was it? And did it seem like it came from something geological or from outer space, or what? That's such
We
a
didn't know.
strange thing to understand.
We didn't really take it past the point where we said we knew what the source. We knew the probability of what the source was. Then we said, okay, well, where could it possibly have come from? Was the next step in the investigation, which we didn't really come up with any true conclusion. But then, we knew more about what we would have. Of course, you're never going to say, oh, it was a spaceship or something like that, or it was a government thing. And you never do that. I mean, it was always, we knew that it was some radiation beam that came from someplace. Actually, we knew it was elevated, and it came down at a certain angle because of the way the injury occurred and how it hit the back of the head and things like that.
So you were able to tell by the direction of the radiation, like pulse on the victim or whatever, that it did come from, it seemed like above and from behind them, it would seem like.
Yes, that's correct.
That's so fascinating. It seems like some of the other evidence that has come around out of the basin seems to indicate that as well. Like there's a band of energy or something hidden that we can't quite perceive with our normal awareness that exists like up above, and people might say that those are UFOs or whatever. I'm not necessarily convinced they're physical craft at this point. It could just be like an anomaly of perception when you look up and are in that zone. But yeah, that's so interesting. So you've been involved in this work for quite some time, and it's led you all around the basin and elsewhere into other parts of research. But really quick, I wanted to talk about what you've done up there in the Uintah Basin and how people can see the research that you're doing, because that's what surprised me when I met you up there at the convention that we were at last year. When I went into the Blind Frog Ranch outpost, I was amazed that there was a display there showing the actual scientific devices, the sensors, and even a screen showing some of the readings and how all of that works. And so it's not just people going around with briefcases in the back of their car. This is an active community involved project that you've got going on now, if we fast forward. So let's just take them a minute and talk about that. So you've had these initial encounters, and now you've got these devices and this system set up. So what are you working on now up in the basin?
Well, one of the things that we learned, and Bigelow learned this when he had all his scientists, is that the phenomena, that's what everybody calls it, the phenomena, you can't experiment on it in a assertive way. Unfortunately, you have to let things go the way they want to go, and you have to bring in your instrumentation, or you bring your observations in on a more of a passive basis. In other words, if you were trying to go out, and Bigelow learned this, right? If you would go out there and you set up an experiment and you plug in all your wires and you wait for the thing to happen, it'll never happen. And he got so frustrated by this that he basically, after 8 years, he gave up. So it was very clear that whatever we were going to do, we have to do it with two things. We know it affects people in their normal life and normal day-to-day life.
Hmm.
And we know what happens in certain places, in their homes or in their cars or something like that. So we said, okay, we have two scientific types of scientific instruments, which is one is the person that's in the basin that's going around and just doing their normal life. They're not thinking about the phenomena, anything. And then we have another piece of equipment, which is electronic, that's actually reading all the environmental signals that are around that particular person. And then what we do is we grab data from them through their what they call annotations. They have like a website to go to that they could say, today I just had a horrible headache, or I had a vision, or I saw something flying in the air. And then what we do is we take that back with we take that and we compare it to what exactly was happening in the environment at the time that they had these experiences.
Hmm.
And then we start to get the correlation. So again, that's what Bigelow. I mean, there's all other scientists that operate in the thing that you say, well, ATIP came in and did all these great experiments. Well, they probably didn't learn a lot because it's very, very, very it's obvious to Bigelow and all these people now that that what's going on now is that you can't really predict when things going to happen. You have to let it happen and be ready when it happens. So that's something we learned. So about 3 years ago, when I had, in fact, I don't know if you know that, but I was on this Skinwalker, Secret of Skinwalker for the first season. And that's when I really learned that there was just no way to do science when you're trying to do the science. You have to do the science in such a way that you're letting it happen naturally.
Hmm.
So about 3 years ago, I said, well, I think the best thing to do is to get out into the valley or get out into the basin, talk to the people that were in the basin having these experiences, verifiable experiences that had medical conditions that associated with it. And there was quite a few. I mean, there's several dozen of these people.
Hmm.
And instrument them to the point where they can record what they're doing, how they're feeling, what they're experiencing in a database that has, some kind of a timestamp to it. And then at the same time, record everything I can record in the background without them really being aware of it, or they were cognizant of it, but they weren't really aware of what the data was, and then correlate those two. So around 3 years ago, that's when we kind of kicked this thing off, and we have quite a few instruments now that are in the basin operating that are collecting data full time. I was fortunate enough to Dwayne Olinger is a great guy. He actually tried to or he actually is right now instrumenting a lot of the things that he's doing. And one of the interesting things that we're doing now is trying to understand a little bit more what's going on right around the valley, or right around his area, which is the upper. Well, we back up a little. One of the interesting things we found being in the basin is that a lot of the crazy things that happen to people are up near the canyon, in the back,
Right.
In the mountain area. And that's kind of where like Neola is and La Pointe is and all those guys up there. And of
Right.
course, that's where the Blind Frog Ranch is.
Right.
So that's where the stuff happens. So we're getting a lot of data there and getting a lot of interesting data there that we're correlating with a lot of the things that people are saying to us. We're getting, I guess everybody's watching the show now, and every time they come up with this new revelation, we pulled this stuff out of the ground, or we read this. He says, well, I know I have gobs of data and all these experiences from people that show that in fact this stuff is true. So I'm not surprised they're doing this stuff and getting radiation and doing all that stuff.
Right, definitely. We got actually a $10 donation for the show from Transportador 33. Thank you so much. It says great conversation. Guess I'm going to have to check out Blind Frog for some more data points.
Absolutely.
Definitely. We should go ahead and look at some of these data points because if people go into the Blind Frog Ranch outpost, they can see some of the screens of this research that's going on and the detectors, and we can actually show you some of that on screen as well. I have a couple of different slides here. Let's see if I can pull
The
them up
second, yeah,
here.
that one. If you go over the
One
second,
more.
third one, yeah,
Third one here.
yeah.
Okay.
If you could zoom in on that a little bit.
I'll see if I can try to zoom in here. I
No, it's
might
okay.
I might
Get
not
the
be able
idea.
to there.
That's okay. So this is so basically you've got instruments that are out in the basin that are located in specific areas with people. You can see the diagram there on the right hand side where you see the picture of the sky. There's two pictures there, one of an antenna and then one of a box of electronics. And
Right.
that's something that sits outside and just gathers all sorts of information. It gathers gamma radiation, microwave radiation. It looks at the gravity vector and it records it. And this is just a screenshot. This is not real time. The one that's in the outpost is all real time, but that's all the real time data that is going through there. And then what I have is it programmed when certain things happen to the data. Like for instance, if I get a gamma ray spike, it'll actually create an alert. It'll actually send me an email and say,
Hmm.
we got a gamma ray spike at this particular place. And then that gets me ready to go look at some other, the people's data that are entering this thing. So that's one of the bigger devices. The bigger device that's over there on the right hand pane, that's the antenna and the electronics that sits there. And it also has a camera. It actually has two cameras up top.
Hmm.
A lot of times, what people will tell me is that they get this strange feeling they're being watched, and then they look up in the sky, and sure enough, they'll find these things flying by, which they'll take a picture of, and they'll actually include that with their with their annotations that they provide.
Hmm.
So I have a camera that's looking at constantly at. So what I want to do is I want to be able to give these people peace of mind that they're not seeing things that are not there. So
Right.
I'm constantly looking for these things, recording them. And if I see something that is other than a bird or a plane or something like that, or a satellite or a cloud that looks very suspicious, I log it, report it, and then I use that data
Hmm.
to correlate it with what they're telling me. They can't see this data until well after the fact. I give them the opportunity to see this, later on. I don't want to perturb their or skew their thoughts. So that's the bigger devices. Then on the left side pane, there's two devices there. These are two different devices. One is in the basin, but one actually is on the West Coast.
Hmm.
Um, so we do a lot of work on the West Coast. And these devices, that's the real-time traces from these devices. Nothing really at that point that I took this, nothing was really happening. You can't really see anything going on. But one of these devices, the one in the upper one, it has a lot of activity. There's somebody that has a lot of problems with what he calls tricksters and things like that, where he'll come home and things are just skewing all over the place. And obviously he had his alarm on, and so
Hmm.
he's had these problems for a few years, and we were able to correlate this with some, believe it or not, some gamma ray spikes at that exact moment or during the time when he felt that things got moved around in his house. We were reading gamma. Now, I want to tell gamma ray is not something that you and I could produce in our house. It's
Right.
it's not something anybody can produce in the house. You need specialized equipment. So when I see that kind of thing or these large microwave spikes, people really can't produce these things. So there's no way to fool me. And unless they're like NASA scientists or something like that, they're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So I get pretty confident that there's these things going on. So this is kind of like just a view of, in fact, this is a screenshot from the Blind Firecracker portal that's sitting in. There's a big screen there in the thing that goes all the time.
Yeah.
So I just took a screenshot of that. But I have many, many other devices, and there's some. Actually, I have a case study. If you want to go to the second slide there. So
Sure.
this is a case study and this is actually, you can see the annotation that people put in here. This is one of the incident reports that was produced, and there was I guess I can't really read it from here, but the annotation was, "I've never felt."
Yes, as
Can you
I'm
read?
telling you, last night was such a crazy night. If I were to ever say I was abducted, I would have been last night. It was the strangest experience.
Yeah, that was actually came from somebody who never says anything like that. They don't. they don't believe in induction. They don't believe in any of that stuff. But
Right.
I guess it was so crazy that night that they had some really bad dreams. They couldn't sleep afterwards. And when I went back and looked at the data, so up top is the microwave radiation. This radiation that comes from your phone, the microwave oven, your Wi-Fi, and it's normally just that blue band. If I go back days and days and days, it's nice. But exactly at the time what that person said had happened, you get these spikes in there, and it's
Huh.
it's just very strange what happened. And then I looked at the gamma. Now, the gamma is kind of scary if you really want to know the truth, but it's not lethal at this point. Normally, the gamma, see that red line that's just jiggling? That's what you get all day long, all day long. That exact moment that person had that particular thing, I think it was around 12 o'clock in the midnight or something. They were, long since been in bed. There was this major gamma shower or spikes or whatever you want to call it, and that's the blue stuff is the actual spikes recorded by the device, and the red is the actual kind of average of it. And you can see that it just, I mean, that's unheard of to have that big of a spikes. But this
Right.
person actually had some physiological changes or physiological manifestations of her nervous system, and had extreme headaches, couldn't sleep, had a very strange dream, and and that's what they reported. It was like, this is the first time this ever happened. If I ever decided I ever thought I was being abducted, this was the night. I guess
Yeah.
maybe I don't know. She woke up and like it was a little disorientated or something. But you could see, I mean, when you get that and you find this data happening at the same time, there's this like big question mark. What is going on? And to be honest with you, people can't produce this themselves. I mean, there's no physical way unless they went and they bought a linear accelerator and put it
Right.
in their house. So
That's really the thing I want to impress on everybody's minds, and why it's so important to have people like you on the show, is because it's one thing for people to report their paranormal encounters or abduction experiences and to be like, wow, I had this whole like near death experience or out of body experience or paranormal encounter. But when you can actually measure something scientifically with devices, just like we showed on this last slide, you have this detection equipment in the yard. They've got one of these sensors that they're either carrying on them or that's in their home, and they're almost like a human biosensor. And you're able to overlap those layers of evidence from their personal witness encounter and their testimony of what they experienced as a eyewitness or experiencer. But then you overlap that with, at the same day and time, there was a phenomenon. There was an uptick in gamma radiation. Something was actually there occurring in physical reality. This isn't just solely psychic, subconscious episode or something. You're
right.
actually capturing something in the real environment that's occurring and changing associated with this. And I think that's critical for people to understand that part of what you're doing, and how important that is.
And I think it's important for the actual people that this happens to. I mean, if you were sitting in your house and all of a sudden you became this, you got these hallucinations. It's like you say, "Wow, what's wrong with me? I mean, do I have a tumor or what's going on?" But if you say, "Well, it really happened because something in the environment caused it to happen,"
Right.
again, I want to stress to everyone that this is not these levels, although they look pretty high and significant, they're still not dangerous. There's still more microwaves inside your microwave oven than sitting on
Sure.
that first slide. Gamma, that's a little high. I mean, I wouldn't want to be exposed to that for any long period of time. But there's, it's good for the people to understand that they didn't make it up and they're not just crazy. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
of all of the things that came out of this thing, it's giving the people that is happening to a little peace of mind to say they're not making this up, and there's nothing really. I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong with them, but there's nothing wrong with them to the point where they're just hallucinating.
Yeah, there's substance in reality to an actual evidence of what's occurring to them, even if they can't grasp or fathom what they witnessed or what the side effects of that
Sure.
experience are. You're actually capturing that there something did occur, and it's not just happening within the brain or within their own subconscious. I think that's huge for people that are concerned about this, especially the people that are getting sick and actually injured by it. We're
Yeah.
talking about a location and a place where there's been historical, even cattle mutilations and animal mutilations that go throughout many decades and have been researched alongside all of this. And
Yep.
maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But um, yeah, so you're capturing actual spikes in gamma radiation and microwave radiation that correlate right when a person in the middle of the night feels like they had like an abduction encounter. And so
Yeah,
it,
that's right.
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So maybe you
I
can
mean,
walk us through some of these other slides here too.
and I just want to be clear that sometimes nothing happens. I mean, there are people that have experiences, and you look at the data, there's nothing there.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It's just that, I guess it could be two things. Maybe the equipment's not sophisticated enough to pick it up, or I don't know. It's a lot of speculation as far as if you don't get an exact correlation. I just wanted to show you what happens is that this is exactly the same time. So one is this top one is the gravity. So if you go back to that slide, so the third one, the second one, the middle one is the gravity. You can see
Hmm.
that the gravity vector, the gravity vector is something that we count on every day to keep us on the ground, and our brain is very, very receptive, or very, very it could be bothered, or I don't know exactly how to say it properly, but it could really affect us if
Right.
the gravity vector varies just a little bit. And you can see that pink line, that's the actual gravity vector. And it was going along very, very nicely. All of a sudden it just popped,
Huh.
and it just had a little deviation there. And again, had a very bad night, manifested in a, neurological symptoms that were very acute at that point. So that's what happened. And then the acceleration vector, the one above it, that's like, that doesn't normally happen.
Right.
It just went crazy.
And we don't know why or what's causing this. This is what's so mind-boggling is that everybody's expecting that this might be coming from underground, could
Right.
be like a geological effects, like a piezoelectric, like I don't even know the proper scientific wordage for it, but um, how is this coming down from the sky up above and hitting people and up from different angles and you know,
Well, yeah, it's a couple schools of thought. You know, the thing is that it doesn't. If it's a consistent signal and it was always on and it was always being high, then I would say, well, it's probably something natural that's sitting in the ground, but it's not. It's something that happens very transient. It's very quick. So is it something that's flying over their head that's doing surveillance or something like that? Is it a very sophisticated drone that maybe
hmm,
be looking, if you want to, conspiracy theorists would love this to say, it's a drone from another country that's spying on us, and then we're just getting a look at the signals. So that's possible, or it's some other kind of vehicle. But it looks to be, first of all, the radiation, the microwave radiation, doesn't go well under the ground. So probably it's not coming from underneath. It has to be going through the air or along the surface of the earth.
hmm.
So it's probably coming from above. Or I wouldn't say above. It's coming from above the ground. The originating, just because of the way the microwave actually is persistent. Now, the gamma could come from the ground. The gamma has no problem going through Earth,
Right.
but the microwave stuff can't very well.
That's so interesting. So yeah, because a lot of, I've kind of held this theory that maybe there was something to do with the flowing aquifers and the water, like the crystalline structures of the geology creating some sort of
Yep,
resonance that creates an anomaly in the electromagnetic field of the earth or something. But it seems like it's coming from the sky or something transient that
I think
moves
so.
around. And
Yep.
does it seem to target individuals, or have you
Well,
noticed like repeated individuals get targeted, or does that move around as well?
okay. Here's an interesting case. One of the things that we do, we've been recording now for 3 years. We have terabytes worth of data. Many terabytes worth of data. One thing we did notice, though, and actually was an interesting couple cases where if the people leave, if they go away, or if they go on vacation, the signals, all of these things stop. And it was interesting, though. There was a particular case where a person who had a lot of activity, I mean, consistently a lot of activity. Every week there'd be something happen to them. They would
Mm.
report that, I had this experience, and then I would have some correlation to data. Then all of a sudden it stopped. And it was just like flatlined. Everything was very benign. It was, very, very, and, like a week after that, I says, I don't understand. Is there something wrong with your device? And nothing is going on. There's no gamma spikes. There's nothing. They said, well, I was away for 2 weeks. They had literally gone on vacation for 2 weeks. So the answer to that is, and that's not just, and I had many experiences like that where I would say, wait, what's going on? Why isn't there any data coming through from your device anymore? Not data, but interesting data. And
Right.
they say, yeah, we're not here anymore. We haven't been home for a few weeks. So that
Huh.
was probably the most interesting thing. And that goes back to, if you're not there, then the phenomena, whatever it is, really doesn't interact with you. So I think
Hmm.
that to answer your question, I think it's people based, but people based in a specific location, or they have to be in a certain place or environment, or they have to be
Really?
doing certain things.
Really? So you feel like it's like there's the human element. Do you think it's genetic or biological? Like certain people are more, their DNA is more wired, almost like an antenna to interface with these sorts of signals and have the phenomena occur to them, or what do you
I
think's
think
going on?
so. I think that's exactly right. I think that some of us, like myself, we all have these rational brains and irrational brains. Some people have more irrational than rational. So if something ever happened to me, I would probably spend my whole brain would just go into the, I'm going to rationalize it and I'm going to ignore it and I'm not going to pay attention to it. But there's some people that have, like, the people that have like really good imaginations, people that maybe had some problems with some neurological problems or high fevers at one point, and it just makes them more susceptible to receiving these and not passing it off as, some rational thing, like, oh, it's just a headache or something like that. So
Right.
it just seems that of all the people that are in the study, the people that have the most interaction, the most interesting things, are all people that either had some prior condition, or are the type of people that are very, very imaginative. Maybe they write books, or they're artsy, or they do a lot of things with that side of their brain. But the technical people, like myself, unfortunately, I think that my brain just says, yeah, you're crazy. Don't even pay attention to whatever you just felt. So I
Interesting.
think certain people have a propensity to be more receptive to these things. So if you have these traits and you feel and you get these things, feel yourself lucky, because I don't, unfortunately. But I know that
Huh.
if you look at all the people in the study that have this, they pretty much all have something that either happened to them, or they have this unique personality where they have this ability.
Do you think it might have to do with some of the inheritance or ancestry of the people that lived indigenously in the neighborhood? Or do you
Yeah,
think that has nothing to do with it? Because it feels like it's so tied into the cultural heritage of the region as well, the folklore and the myths and the experiences of their entire belief systems revolve around it. And I almost wonder if living in certain environments almost has like a cymatic effect on your biology, and it
sure.
makes certain cultures of indigenous people more attuned to the nature that they existed in for maybe 1,000 years. Or I
Yep.
don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, being in the basin, and a lot of people like in Arizona and things like that. So it turns out that there's a certain group of people, certain ethnic group, that have a very, very high reception to this stuff. People that live, that natively in the area, that have been there for hundreds and thousands of years. There may be spiritual in nature. They may be they have a great beliefs or religious beliefs and things like that. And I have a partner that I work with who is a Native American, who is in touch with all these people, and she knows everybody. And one of the things that we concluded is that it's very, very, the reception to this phenomena is very, very high in her in the people that she knows.
Right. Yeah, and almost to the point where you see evidence of that up around Blind Frog Ranch, possibly with the smelting operations, the different
Yep.
mining of particular types of precious minerals. It makes you wonder if they were almost culturally trying to interface with it more intuitively. Because, like, well, we have like one of these comments coming in from someone called Beware of the Yellowstone, talking about the gallium that was found and the gold and the weights of that, the benefits, like how it's sort of a conductor, and we use it in our electronics and things. Do you think somehow that geology was being, and the minerals of the earth were being utilized and kind of interpreted by these ancient cultures, and all of that sort of blended together to become what it is now? Or
Could be. I think gallium is one of those type of materials that don't really have a lot of uses outside of the exotic uses that we have today, like doing ion drives or using electronics and things like that. But as a material that was fascinating, I would say that for any culture that goes back, that material is amazing. You can hold it in your hand. You can do all sorts of things with it. It could be a religious thing. It could be something of great value to people. But when I heard about gallium, it was like, oh my God, because I used to experiment with it all the time.
mm,
Back when I worked with Hal Puthoff, where we were making ion engines and using that as our, not our fuel, but it was the vehicle to create, because you always, to create thrust, and you're creating ions from this thing. So when I
right.
started heard that, I said, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's all kind of interconnected, and it makes you wonder if there's something that has to do with that and that they understood in the ancient cultures, and we're just trying to either rediscover it today, or
Hmm.
if it was not really used by ancient cultures. But this is where the kind of the ancient astronaut theory comes in, where there was maybe an invasion of sorts from other beings that wanted to use those sorts of elements
Yeah.
that existed for a while. It makes
Well,
you
if I
wonder.
was to make a spaceship, trust me, it would have gallium as my propellant.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that for that type of thing, that's exactly what you want. That's
Huh.
You don't want to have a rocket motor, but a gallium ion engine or thruster would be perfect.
Yeah, and then I guess if you had near faster than light travel or whatever, you're bordering on time travel in a way, and maybe you'd get your fuel from alternate past timelines or whatever, and we could be experiencing all sorts of anomalies like that,
Sure.
especially if there's deposits up in
Yeah.
certain parts of the
Yeah,
earth,
maybe that's what makes it so attractive for that area. People or civilizations have come there and used that material. I mean, there's bismuth in the area. Bismuth is an amazing
Huh.
conductor. It's very, very unique. Yeah, I don't know if you remember this thing called Arts Parts. They found it was, what was it? Magnesium, zinc, bismuth layers, very, very thin layers. And that would be the perfect combination to make what they call a waveguide. It's to transfer large amounts of energy over a little tiny thing
Huh.
to certain things. So, when you start seeing bismuth in the area and you start seeing gallium in the area, big question marks come up.
And iridium and different elements, and they're all
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
localized around this, and so you start to get these theories of there being a meteorite impact or some sort of
yeah.
strange anomaly that occurred. But it definitely makes these locations so unique. But your research has expanded throughout that. You said you're doing stuff all up around the West Coast and
West Coast,
elsewhere.
East Coast, yep.
Yeah, can you talk about that at all? Is it similar types of research, or what are you working
Yeah, very
on?
similar.
Yeah,
So what we're doing, so if you go back to that screen, there was two others I wanted to show
yeah,
just
yeah.
quickly. I know we're running short on time. On the right two ones.
Yeah, we're
Um,
totally fine on time.
so one of the interesting things that had happened over the course of a couple of years is that when we had this original injury, we had said that it looked to be something like a radiation beam that came in, or a pulse radiation beam that came in and caused the damage.
Hmm.
Around the time that we did this, there was a incident in Havana called at the embassy in Havana, where 50 some odd, or actually it was 25 some odd embassy personnel got hit with something, some something that caused some pretty significant damage to them. Later on, it was called the Havana Syndrome. I
Right.
don't know if you've heard of that, but
Yeah.
it's something now that's all over the news. It's a big thing now. But back then, when we came out with our analysis and said it was a radiation spike that did this to this particular patient, years later, after the Havana Syndrome went through many investigations, the Academy of Sciences, which is a National Academy of Sciences, is a very well-known organization that does a lot of experiments, did a final report on the Havana Syndrome cases, all 50 of them, and their final analysis was that it was a radiation spike that
Huh.
came out. So if you read their report, that's clearly stated in there. So we have been reading these radiation spikes for 3 years now. And if this is one of the incidents, so you can see the normal blue line is every day. It's Wi-Fi, it's your cell phone. It's who knows what it is. It's all sorts of stuff in there.
Just that background default
Yeah, it's just stuff
wavelength. Yeah.
going, normal day. But then we had this monster spike on this particular day, and exactly at that moment, I don't want to read that with it. Don't read that what that is. I should have blanked that one out. But that was an annotation that somebody had put in for when that happened. They had some kind of a incident. So this was not in the basin. This was someplace else, more towards the Washington area, I would say. But these are incidents that happen all over the country. So what the government is now spending money to investigate this Havana Syndrome, we've had this data that we've been collecting now for the past few years that show these definitive spikes that are coming up with people. And there is, there's definitely going to be a correlation between what we're finding and then what they're going to eventually find with the investigations that they're doing. So this is one, and there's another one, I think. Yeah, there's another one a day. This is a different case where, again, they were just average going along. This is, I guess, the stuff on the left side, that's all the Wi-Fi stuff, that's just that jiggly stuff. But then you get these monster spikes. We count the devices that record this are calibrated, and in order to make this, you'd have to actually have one of those big RF horn or the radio frequency horns, big microwave horns, and actually point it at the device. And I doubt very much these people have this in their basement. So, and you have to have pretty sophisticated equipment to do it. So this came from something. We don't know what it came from, but they kind of came to us and said, that the next day or maybe a couple days later, they says, I had a terrible headache that day, where my nose was I had an unexplained nosebleeds, and I never get nosebleeds and things like that.
So what does this indicate to you? Does this indicate to you some sort of like phenomenon occurring with like our solar system, solar flares, or space anomalies and radiation across like
Could be, yeah,
vast
could be.
deep space, or
Yeah.
is it something more local or extra dimensional, Because Bigelow wound up, now he's doing afterlife studies, and Hal Puthoff is all involved in the To the Stars Academy
Mhm.
and other exotic propulsion methods in UFO research, and was involved in consciousness studies. So, what is your take on all of this from your perspective as a scientist?
Well, there's, that's actually not in that's more in the philosophy range. So the scientist's
Sure.
job is to collect the data, to present it, and to not really go to the next level. But if you take that hat off and you put your other hats on, I look at this thing. I think there's two possibilities. There is some terrestrial type of intelligence, some government, or I wouldn't even say government now, though everything is privatized. Some company that possibly has a very sophisticated stealthy drone that flies over and has equipment to do some surveillance. I mean, that's very, very possible. And
Like
I
it could
think,
be like the satellite technology, like of the Cold War era, where they were trying to beam signals into people,
yes,
or
absolutely, yep.
hmm,
But up in drones, or maybe up in, maybe not at the satellite level. I mean, the satellite level is kind of high to do this. Maybe at the drone level. These drones are pretty sophisticated now. They
hmm.
have a lot of power in them to create these very, very high radiation spikes. So that's a possibility where another agency, a terrestrial agency, is doing this. And then the other possibility that it's coming from something extraterrestrial, some gamma spikes that, or a binary star that explodes, or something like that, that's creating these things. It's very possible.
Hmm.
But then again, you look at it and say, well, why is it happening just to these people? Why is it happening to them? And you put the device someplace else that's not. So I have devices that are separated by, I think, mile, say. Um, RF, if it came from the sky, would spread out pretty far before it hit the ground.
Yeah.
So one doesn't get it, but one gets it. So how do you explain that in a logical way where it looks more targeted, like it came from like a phased array? So if it came from like some natural phenomena, it would come in spread out, and it would be in the whole general area. You'd pick it up in this device, and this device, and this device. But if it was like one device, it was very concentrated, you have to say, like, did it come out some kind of a phase array, some kind of a focus type of beam? And I think that's what the government's looking at. They're looking at a very fast focused energy beam.
That's so interesting. Because you're right. If it was like some solar flare or a star exploding in the distant space, sending like a scattering of soup of radiation onto a certain area, you would get like a wash of it. It wouldn't be so focused because you're talking about sometimes individuals within a home, but the other people even in the home don't experience it.
That's right.
There's
That's right.
just like one person almost targeted, which again leads back to like Hal put off a lot of his original research was with laser technology and
Oh
focused.
yeah, he was a big laser guy. Yep.
Right. Fascinating. So it might all tie into that, like this idea of, oh, I'm just wrapping my head around this because we have this whole layer of the Cold War era technology that was occurring at the same time as these experiments on psychic warfare that were going on. So you had focused laser beam technology and research being done at the same time as consciousness studies and being able to do remote viewing
Hmm.
and projecting of thoughts and reading minds, telekinesis and such. And at the same time, you've got the Star Wars race with the satellites being built and drone technology coming out
Sure.
in these black projects. And so all of that could easily be interpreted as like psychic holographic manipulation of different individuals or experimentation or uh, you know government involvement with projected
Yeah.
psychic warfare and weapons going on in the Cold War. But it seems so strange that it would be revolving around the Uintah Basin. Do you find that it is, or is that just kind of like because the television shows are focused up on Blind Frog Ranch and Skinwalker Ranch? Do you think it's more broad than that?
Well, I think that it's all over the country, all over the world, but I think they're in the basin. There's a very specific flavor of it. It
Hmm.
manifests itself in a very specific way. No other place. If you go to like the East Coast, the people that are having issues in the East Coast, where they just basically see spikes. They
Yeah.
don't ever see anything in the sky. They don't ever see anything. They don't have any crazy things happening in their home except for themselves. They'll get the nosebleeds, they'll get the ear pains, they'll get tinnitus and all that kind of stuff. But in the basin, it's where you start seeing, um, you'll start seeing these crazy things. The dog will start barking, and you'll see things in the sky. So
Hmm.
it just seems that in the basin, the people in the basin spend most of their time looking up, where everybody else doesn't really look up, because they don't really see anything.
Hmm.
But there seems to be a lot of stuff in the sky now. Whether or not it's just so clear there, and there's East Coast and West Coast, there's a lot of pollution, so you really can't see very high. Out there's no pollution or very little pollution, so you can see a lot. And you can
Hmm.
see satellites going by. You can watch a satellite go by. You can, if you look really close, you probably see the space station. But you see these lower altitude things that fly over that are not satellite. They're not in synchronous orbit. They just flying by, pretty fast.
Yeah.
Sometimes they change directions, which is kind of disturbing. And these are the people. This is what they experience. So, well, and I get these pictures and videos all the time. When I first got these things, it was like, yeah, really, this is just a bird, or this is. But then you start looking at them, and you start looking at their data, that you start looking at their experiences, and you start taking these things seriously. It's like, wait a minute, these people are not making this up.
They're not dreaming it, they're not hallucinating it. You've got the data now to
Yeah,
correlate. You've got the sensor readings, you've got the radiation readings, and then you've got also a lot of times imagery depicting objects that they're seeing
Yep.
as well, that they're taking. So it's starting to paint this entire picture. What's strange for me is how often these experiences are like correlated with this alien abduction phenomenon, or even with like skinwalkers and Bigfoot or shadow people. Do you, what are your thoughts or speculations on that? Do you think it's the cognitive effects that it's having on a person's perceptions of reality and creating sort of a altered state of consciousness when they're hit with certain radiations? Or do you think it's opening up their perception to perceive other dimensions of reality or other places in time anomalously? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so when I finished my education, I did a postdoc, and a postdoc is where you go and you do this research. And I was fortunate enough to end up in a radiation oncology area to do my research. And I worked with the people that were giving cancer patients treatments for lesions in their head.
Mm,
So I would a lot of times be with them and talk to the patients afterwards, and the strangest things would come out of it. They would be in this machine that's bombarding their head with radiation, and they would come out and say, I'm sitting in here getting a treatment, and you guys are having a party. What was all that noise? And then some people would say, well, I was in there getting radiation. I smelled pizza. Why were you guys eating pizza?
mm,
But of course, we never did. But what happens when things hit your head, you get all of these neurons firing, you get all these action potentials that are firing, and who
mhm.
knows what's going on in your head? So people that maybe see things that we don't see, they might have gotten hit by something. Their brain's trying to rationalize it. They build a story around it. Of course, we're great scientific instruments, but we're terrible reporters.
Mm.
So you get these people that say, I saw this being that came into my room here, but maybe it was just that they did get hit by something and their brain is trying to figure it out, and your back brain, your subconscious, has just built a nice little story for you. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that I had a lot of experience with these patients that said
Right.
basically the same things.
Yeah. We don't consciously, we're not aware of our default mode as human beings. We wake up in the morning and just get dressed and we have this conversation that goes on in our minds. We don't really fathom how there's like this whole liquid crystal balancing mechanism within our skull that
Yeah.
helps your whole sense of reality be upright and not feel like it's spinning off its axis and like you're falling through the floor. And there's all these different systems that go on electromagnetically in plasma forms within the brain. And we don't consider how we exist in a world where we're bombarded with these frequencies and with these radiations and these waveforms that just basically wash through us all the time. Every satellite signal, Wi-Fi signal, radio signal is washing through our reality 24/7 and we just don't perceive it. But then when you get into certain areas like this, like up in the Uintah Basin and around, it seems like there's these spikes that occur where particular individuals are get tapped into some sort of energy, or they go into a particular zone, or biologically they're attuned to it and they have these spikes in these perceptions. And you're right, it's almost like you're seeing a Rorschach ink blot or some sort of a phenomenon occurring, and your subconscious just paints over what that is.
Mhm.
And it might look like something paranormal or ball of light in the sky. But what's so interesting is how the evidence is showing that there is something physical to it. There is
Yes.
things getting captured on camera. There is stuff being detected that it is real. It's not just all in the head. So, I mean, what is your best stab at that? Do you think, I mean, we have kind of wrestled around this a few different times, but if you had to say whether it was experimental government stuff, or do you think it's, because the legends and the ancient folklore go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the petroglyphs in the region all kind of indicate that this stuff was going on a long time. So could it just be like China or Russia or some government program, or do you think it's something stranger than that?
Well, it could be both. It could be that it's not too crazy to think that this has been going on for thousands of years.
Right.
But just like the United States, and we would see these signals, and maybe we could reverse engineer these and learn a little bit about them and use them ourselves. So maybe we've adopted the technologies that have been developed or that we've witnessed over the years. It was spouted that Russia had these amazing electronic devices that were able to read your mind and things like that. It's possible that they reverse engineered a signal that they found and they started building devices around that. So maybe it came from something extraterrestrial and just became part of our technological. Of course, we don't hear about it. It's more of a secret thing in the government. But
Right.
I would say that if it was government based, then of course the big question mark is what the hell would they care about Uintah Basin?
Right.
But there are things there that are very interesting, of course. But I would say that it was probably somebody looking at the area, something. I don't want to say extraterrestrial or ETs or anything like that. Something that they're very interested in whatever resources that particular area has,
Hmm.
and they're finding all sorts of crazy things in there.
Yeah, they really are. The whole history and the geology seems to speak of that. If there was some sort of cargo cult or like culture extraterrestrials that came and needed supplies for their propulsion systems, or they needed gallium or whatever, it seems like they would come and explore some of these hot spots and it would create that. But
Yep.
it's so fascinating that they would seem to target individuals, and there seems to be like pulsar beams, and you hear these experiences. Like I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with like Philip K. Dick. He wrote a series of books. He wrote one called Valis, but that was his whole thing. It was like he claimed that he was basically sitting in his house, and it was like a beam of radiation or energy came through the wall of his house and into his mind, and it was like he had a whole download of information. But it also made him kind of like a conspiracy theorist about satellite images being beamed into people and all of
Yeah.
that. And he ended up writing several books about it. But um, it really does make you wonder if there was an advanced entity or extraterrestrial beings or something, how they would try to come down and study us by reading our minds or
Well,
reading the environment and scanning things. And if there was stuff in the environment they were looking for,
yep.
and they would pick particular individuals that had a certain resonance they could tap into to try and interface with. Who knows?
Yeah.
So on your edge of the research, does it feel like that conversation is like fairly known and kept secret, or does it still feel very speculative and unknown to you?
I think speculative, and I what we do or what I'm doing in this particular study is that we don't even go that far. We don't even go to the point where we put a finger on what it is.
Yeah.
So our whole objective is more to say, look, we know the phenomena happens. We have a way of recording it on different instruments. And that's what happened way back, when we had the first patient. We said, okay, here's a method that we can, further learn about this thing. So, okay, let's do that for a little while. So we built some equipment. We had a procedure in place, and we did that for a little. And then we learned something. We said, okay, now we're a little bit smarter. Now we make another generation of the equipment. Now we got a little bit better. We got a little bit more focused. We start understanding more about how we interact with the people. And then we say, okay, well, now that taught us something. So we do that for a couple of years, and we do that. And now we're at the next phase. We're at this phase that we're in right now. We said we know exactly what it looks like, what these signals look like. So we have a piece of equipment that kind of gets in there. And then we know how to treat the people and talk to the people and gather information about that. So it's not until we go down the road where we get more and more refined and focused in till we say, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. It's under the ground, or there it is. It's up in the sky. We're not there yet, but we need a lot more data points. We need, right now we need 10 times as many devices out there and 10 times the amount of people or 100 times the amount of people involved in the study. And then we can say, oh yeah, okay. And it's all about statistics. It's all about gathering, right now we're about 4 sigma, which is not very good. In predicting these things or actually getting an idea of when they're going to happen and how they're going to happen. We need to be up in the 5 and 6 sigma, which means, that's way, way beyond what we have right now. So we're a long way off, but at least we're on the road to go there.
So what's the next step in order to get further down that road or to move the ball further down towards the finish line there? Is it more participants being
Participants now, yeah.
willing? And how, like, if anybody watched the show and they're like, I'm having strange out of body experiences or paranormal things occurring, like, how could they maybe get one of these devices and begin to participate in the research to help gather the information and get to the bottom of it?
Well, we have a way of, there's a website that we have. It's I don't know if you can list it. It's mupas.org. It's www.mupas.org. And I have a little thing in there that allows you to enter your name and be a participant. But we have, you know, mostly what we do is we do word of mouth. People that we know, like we have medical conditions, so we work with doctors. We have a lot of people that come to us through other people that we know. But it's like very, very slow growth, and we're looking to say, well, I think it's now to the point where we need to accelerate this. So we're looking at different ways of getting out there and making it a little bit more so anybody that wants to get involved can get involved. So we're on that road. Right now, it's more just doing things, with people that we know. So that's the next step.
That's great. So, one last kind of final thing that I wanted to cover with you in all of your time going to these locations and talking with people who've experienced this, there's these discussions about the hitchhiker phenomenon or how it kind of
Yes. Yep.
rubs off on you in such a way, or like it does have to do with the individual being heightened and it somehow playing off of them and feeding off of that. Have you personally experienced anything unusual, any kind of effects in your life or family, or has anything seemed to follow you around that seems odd?
Me, no. Fortunately, me, no. However, a third of the people that are in the study all have a hitchhiker type of experience where they've come back from some area, mostly the Uintah Basin. They come back, not specifically anywhere, we talked about any of the ranches, but they've spent time there and their family members have gotten terribly sick. There's, I don't know, there's a lot of people that had, so about a third of the people in the study actually have brought it back. And the people that their family members are the ones that are the experiencers now, where they had never been before.
Hmm.
So the hitchhiker's syndrome is real. I mean, can't discount it because we have enough data to at least say that that's real.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how does that factor in? Because if you do try to jump ahead past the evidence and say what the heck is going on, what is
Yeah.
doing this or causing it, it becomes so mind-boggling because it's not just things flying around in the air, it's following people home and causing effects in their personal life. It's so
Yeah.
strange, the whole thing. So that's really cool. So you're doing research all over the place. What is it about Blind Frog Ranch specifically that's got you attracted to that place? Is it to me, a lot of it is the family, the Ollinger family, Dwayne and Chad, and those guys are just so honest and open, and they want to like get to the bottom of what's going on. They're willing to work with people. But what is it about that particular location that attracts you up there?
Well, so that whole upper region of the Uinta Basin, near the canyon, up in that area, is very attractive. So there's a lot of things that happen there. But it's not really so much the ranch that draws me to that. It's Dwayne. I mean, he's the guy that when I talked to him for the first time, I met him a little while ago, maybe 6 months ago or something.
Hmm.
And he said to me, unlike a lot of other people in the basin, he said, I want to figure what's going on. I want to figure out what's going on, and I want to tell everybody. My view is I want everybody to know. So as soon as he said that, that was said, I got to work with this guy because he's in the basin. He's got relationships. He can hook, people up together, and he knows people. So it's more about working with Dwayne than actually the ranch itself. I mean, although the ranch is a great place to do investigations, but again, you have to have people interacting, doing things, and to have those people there doing the show, digging and all that is perfect because that means they're interacting, not really paying attention to the phenomena. They're trying to get gold. They're trying to get rich. And that's when the real things happen. They're not paying attention to or trying to read the phenomena. They're trying to just do what they're doing and let the thing happen. So I
Right.
think it's a great opportunity.
I really think it is too. I love working with that family and the whole team and everybody revolved around it. So is there plans then this year to start installing more sensory equipment and things like that up around that edge of the basin?
I'd say, oh, absolutely. I mean, no question about it. What's going to happen specifically with Dwayne? You got to talk to Dwayne. That's kind of I don't want to spill that one.
That's all forthcoming, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jim, if anybody wanted to look up your research or follow you or maybe reach out to you, what's the best way that they could do that,
Facebook.
Jim?
I have you can search me on Facebook. I think it's just Jim Segala.
Okay.
I'm not real. I'm not too familiar with Facebook, but I have a Facebook that I post the things that the current stuff, any kind of weird things that happen that I can document that I have some really good confidence levels on. I post those things.
That's awesome. Jim, it's been such a pleasure like picking your brain today. I know that everybody watches the TV shows, they get a sense of it and they get sucked into the folklore, the ufology and everything, and they lose sight of the fact that there's real credible research that's ongoing daily, like you said, terabytes and terabytes of information and data and it's starting to paint a picture. It's
Hmm.
starting to come together and coalesce into a bigger idea and perspective of what's
Yep.
going on. And it has impacts that could drastically change the way that we understand ourselves and the nature of reality and
Oh
our
yeah.
planet
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah.
So, what is it, Jim? Our last final thoughts here. What is it that drives you in this research that keeps you the most hooked? Is it the mystery or
Yeah. It's
that?
the big question mark.
Yeah,
Hate question marks, right? You gotta.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel the same way. And I love your approach to it, your scientific approach. And we'll have to get some of your friends to come on the show too. That would be really
Yep.
interesting to pick your brain and everybody else's as well. So, Jim,
Cool.
thanks so much for joining
You
us
betcha.
tonight. Everybody else over in the comments, appreciate you guys. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.